Welcome, my name is Marcin Lewandowski and you're watching the Viewfinder on Adorama TV. In this episode, we will try to understand the camera's possibilities by photographing the same object in the same environment with a number of different settings. A few episodes ago, I brushed upon the topic of manual exposure, explaining the relationship between three main settings, and today we will travel a bit further, looking not so much at the relationship between them, but the possibilities of looking at photographs differently with only the most basic changes that a camera gives us. So let's start with the aperture, as that is the setting that can hugely change the look of our photograph in terms of what's sharp and what's not. Fast aperture allows for singling out a detail, keeping the background and other details blurred. Once we go up with aperture setting, closing it down, more and more details come into focus. It's a vast difference, but as you can imagine, creative possibilities and use for both are endless. And whether you want to single something out or keep everything in focus, aperture is your go-to change. Now, shutter. This is the tool that allows us to experiment with light, so let's try an average aperture of f4 that gives us a bit of bokeh, but also depth of field that doesn't obscure everything. This is what the camera dictated as optimal exposure, and this is what happens once we change the shutter speed to a much faster one, adding a bit of light reflected by a handheld mirror to pull out these wheels. Going in the opposite direction gives us a bit of field to maneuver, and here's the same basic setup with simply casting a shadow on our model to avoid overexposing it. As you can see, just by simply playing with shutter speed, final results differ vastly. I'll skip ISO changes as this will be mostly an aesthetic difference, not really affecting the overall look that much. And now that we have the two main camera settings covered, let's see how different focal lengths affect the look of our model. Starting with my favorite focal length 50mm, we get a pretty balanced image. But with this size of an object, there is still some change in perspective between front and back. But once we go for telelength, whoa! The balance between front and back becomes almost perfect. On the opposite side of the scale, using a wide angle allows us to get much closer to the object, including vast amounts of scenery at the cost of warping the image. But depending on our goals, we have a lot of scope to maneuver in terms of background and overall space usage. Keeping these few things in mind, we can start preparing a mixture, and once you feel comfortable, start adding more variables like using a macro lens to concentrate on details, or playing with composition, and just to mention light bending, but that's a whole new conversation. Subscribe to our channel for more videos and check out Adorama Learning Center for some cool tips and tutorials. This was Marcin Lewandowski for Adorama TV. See you next time.